Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Legal Eagle. We continue our divorce series with an eye on New York today. Jeremy Morley will be joining me in today's show. Now, Jeremy is a U.S. international family law attorney who is an expert for both international relocation and child abduction cases. Jeremy was admitted to the New York bar in 1975 and since then has made huge contributions to the legal world. Jeremy has taught in law schools in the US, Canada, and England, and frequently lectures on international child abduction to the judiciary and bar associations. Additionally, he has often been requested to appear as an expert witness on international child abduction and recovery issues. Jeremy is also the author of International Family Law Practice, which is the leading textbook on international family law in the US. He has authored the Hague Abduction Convention, Practical Issues and Procedures for Family Lawyers. A recurring figure on TV and radio shows on the topic of international child abduction and international divorce law, Jeremy has a wealth of knowledge and experiences to share with us. So Jeremy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here, Sarah May. Thank you for asking me.
How has it been, Jeremy, in New York amidst the COVID situation?
Well, we were worried. We are still worried. It's been okay. For myself, I am spending a lot of time at home. I'm in my home office now. It's nice to be home. I appreciate my family more than ever. We're on Zoom right now, which I love. I just love, I spent the whole day Zooming the world, consulting with clients from all over the place and bringing in other lawyers from other parts of the world. So I appreciate that. So, I'm appreciating the simple things of life and taking it easy and being cautious. And we have to be. And the government here has done, on the local level, has done a pretty good job. And now we're reaping the rewards of it because our numbers, COVID-wise, are low, while other parts of the U.S. are in trouble, which is too bad.
And I think that's the silver lining in this COVID, pandemic, that even though we're all kind of stuck at home, we're spending more time with our families. We're enjoying the quieter life, cooking and going for walks and just kind of tapping into slower pace of life, which is pretty good, I think, in this time.
It's true. We're lucky. We have a house in the country in upstate New York, so that's an escape for us as well. So we can get away from the city and do the hiking and the nature. And as I said, it's the simple things in life.
Yes.
And I appreciate that more than ever. Yeah.
So Jeremy, you're quite a famous international family lawyer. I want to know what inspired you to become a family lawyer in the first place?
So I was inspired to become an international family lawyer. That was what turned me on. So it was the international element.
Yeah.
So I've been in an earlier part of my career, I was a litigator. I litigated whatever cases came my way.
Yeah.
Then I was spending a bit of time back in the UK, and I'm originally from Manchester, with my first wife, and we went through a divorce at that stage. And I bumped into the fact in my own case that it was pretty darn hard to get what I call big picture advice that was reliable and authoritative. So, the lawyers in the UK had, specifically in England, had their own thoughts, but they were not able or willing or ready to discuss whether it was better to bring the case in one jurisdiction or another. The lawyers in New York had their own perspective. And it kind of seemed like everybody was saying, the case belongs where we are.
Yes.
So I ended up solving the problem myself. I did a whole bunch of research and it kind of turned me on in a way. It was intriguing. And once I'd solved it, I kind of realized, as I had had difficulty in getting reliable big picture advice, so others have to be in the same position.
Yes.
And I realized that I had stumbled across an area of the law that I found intriguing because it was about solving puzzles, difficult puzzles that were really important.
Yes.
And yeah, even though I taught in England and Canada and here in the US, I was only admitted to practice in New York. And so I'm always very cautious about talking about the laws of other countries, but I can do it subject to all kinds of disclaimers and bringing in collaboration lawyers from all over the world in so many of the cases I work on. And we give big picture advice of these international elements. Family law is weird because the world is getting smaller and flatter and globalized, but family law is local and parochial.
Yeah.
So people are international more and more. So many people need what I keep calling big picture advice. And that's what I do and enjoy. And I like solving those puzzles, and I like helping families, and especially helping families help children.
Wonderful.
So it's good. I love it.
So Jeremy, if you had a case and there was someone living in New York, and then one kind of party was in maybe Europe, and then, so it involves different countries, how do you go about a case like that? Do you bring in lawyers from all the countries and then kind of have a meeting?
So I spend my day doing that answering those questions, to be honest. So today, I was just talking to somebody in Switzerland who may be moving somewhere, and there's an Eastern European connection as well. I've now had enough experience to be able to start talking about the laws even of places where I'm not admitted to practice, provided that once it gets beyond the initial thinking stage, we bring in lawyers that are practicing in each of the jurisdictions.
Yeah. Okay.
And anything that I say is strictly subject to confirmation or discussion with retained counsel. So I've got a network around the world of lawyers that I've worked with that are great in general, in most, in many, 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 many jurisdictions. Wow. And frankly, I've got myself to the position where I'm often called upon as an expert witness in cases across the United States, or in Australia, or in Canada, or in other countries, to discuss from an expert perspective the international family laws of countries all over the place. So I've been admitted to testify as an expert about the international family law of India and Russia and Sweden and France and the UK and so on and so on and so on, because of all the research that I've done and the work that I've done with so many clients.
Wow, that's fascinating, Jeremy. Not many people, I think, would be in that position to be able to comment on other countries, but I think it's because you've always had your eye on what's the rest of the world doing, and you've done so much research on those countries. And
I'm international. I'm English and I'm American. My first wife is American. My second wife is Japanese, and I've worked on the project globally. So that's what I'm interested in people from other countries and different cultures.
Yes. Wonderful. And so how did child abduction come in? Because you've often been asked to appear as an expert witness on international abduction issues, whether it's on radio shows or TV or even probably court cases. How did that come in, your interest in child abduction?
Through clients. So once I started to hang out my shingle as an international family lawyer in New York, and I started to write about the cases that I worked on and the research that I was doing, clients began to come my way, and that included clients whose children had been abducted and clients who were very fearful that their children might be abducted to another country. And so when a client would come, one of the early ones was married to somebody from Hungary. And so we initiated a Hague Convention case in Hungary with local counsel in Hungary. And one learns by doing.
Yes.
And then what I realized in, for example, the Hungarian case, I started to realize just how meaningful these cases are, not only for the litigants, who are the most important ones, but for the wider community. And so that particular early Hungarian case led to a decision by the Supreme Court of Hungary and one entire night of television in Hungary about the darn case.
Really?
Because the population there was intrigued.
Mm.
The attitude of the newscasters was interesting to me because they were very pro the Hungarian party and very anti the American party. And it caused an uproar. And so one thing led to another. And we had cases from many, many different countries. And each time I had a case, I would often find something that was particularly intriguing, perhaps from an academic perspective, about the particular case. So it led to an article, and articles led to new business and new clients, and it just built up from there.
Very forward thinking, Jeremy. I think that's great. And you've written a book, actually, The Hague Abduction Convention. Practical issues and procedures for family lawyers. Maybe for the benefit of listeners, what exactly is the Hague Convention, and when is it used?
So it's an international treaty. It's being signed now by a little over 100 countries. And it seeks to protect children from the harmful effects of abduction and retention across international boundaries. And it sets forth a procedure to bring about the prompt return of internationally abducted kids. So it says that if a child has been taken to or retained in a foreign country without the consent of a person who has some kind of right of custody over the child, under the law of the child's habitual residence, the child must normally be returned to the habitual residence. There are 6 very limited exceptions. Those are hard to prove. But in most cases, where a child has been taken without the consent of what we call the left behind parent, the Hague Convention requires that the child be returned. It is really a revolutionary document because until then, courts in the countries where children were located would normally decide what is best for the children. They would just handle the custody case.
Yes.
The Hague Convention says otherwise. It says, no. You can't forum shop with children. You can't take a child to another country, start a case there, and bring the custody case there. Send the child back as quickly as possible, and let the courts in the country of the child's habitual residence decide what is best for the child. That's the entire idea behind it.
Yeah. Wonderful. And Singapore is we have a lot of people who kind of come to Singapore for a couple of years and then go out. So I would imagine that the question of like habitual residence would come up, because if you're in Singapore for 2 years and then Malaysia and then New York and then you're moving around, how do the courts look at what is habitual residence?
So that's an interesting question. So it is a question that has befuddled the courts around the world. And in America, our circuit courts were in opposition to each other. There were different standards until very recently for determining habitual residence. Did you focus more on intention of the parents? Do you focus more on looking at things through the eyes of the child or of the parents? What if the parents have made a deal that we're only going to be somewhere for a certain period of time? What if one parent has one idea and the other parent has another idea? And it is very confusing. So in February of this year, for the first time, the US Supreme Court rendered a decision defining habitual residence. And they did so, it was a unanimous decision by Justice Ginsburg. And she basically adopted the test of totality of the circumstances, which is a label. What does it really mean? It means anything and everything can be considered. Does that really help us? Well, it means that there's kind of no rules. Some of our circuit courts had developed very specific rules that seem to produce unfair results. So the treaty itself encourages international uniformity of interpretation. I worked very hard on the leading case. I think it's still the leading case in Singapore on habitual residence. There's a case called TUC versus TUD, which was decided by the Supreme Court of Singapore in May of 2017. And I was behind the scenes doing a lot of writing on the case, working with local counsel, working with wonderful counsel in Singapore. But that led to, that was an intriguing case. You know, that was a case where the parents were in California, and they had been married. They and their children were all American citizens, but they'd been married in India, and they had resided in California. However, the mum's parents and other relatives were in Singapore. And when mum and dad began to argue in California, mum wanted to go and move with the kids to Singapore. And I'll only discuss what is actually in the recorded opinion of the Supreme Court of Singapore. I don't want to go beyond that. But they came after mum was talking about moving to Singapore. Mum and dad came from California to Singapore for a holiday, and they then made some plans to maybe relocate to Singapore. And they all moved there and spent 6 months there. And after 6 months, mum said, "It's not working. Marriage isn't working, and we'll get divorced." At which point, father left and went back to California, asked for the kids at some point to come back to California, but mum said, "No, we're staying here. We moved here." And the issue was habitual residence, and also whether there had been consent by the father. And the district court in Singapore ruled in favor of mum and said that the father had consented to the children being in Singapore for as long as 2 years. And I believe said that the habitual residence was in Singapore, but dad appealed, and it was a heavy appeal. And the Supreme Court of Singapore overturned the district court and said, no, when the first step in habitual residence is to determine what's the relevant date. And the relevant date was when mum said we're divorcing, and dad was shocked. And dad said, I only went to Singapore to try and fix the marriage, and and now you turn around and are saying that we're getting divorced. He claimed that he'd been kind of ripped off. The Supreme Court said, we'll fix the date to fix the habitual residence is the day that mum basically said she's keeping the children here against the wishes of the father. By that time, the children had only been in Singapore for a few months, and the court looked at the fact that there was no real deal between the parents about anything long-term, and they accepted dad's testimony that his agreement to be there for a while was conditioned upon fixing the marriage. And the kids were very young and were not so connected to Singapore, and so the Singapore court ordered that the children were still habitually resident in America, not in Singapore. Kids go back to California. Kids are still in California.
Fascinating. And you were involved in that case in terms of as counsel, or like on the side expert witness?
My name is not anywhere in the case.
Your name is not anywhere in the case.
I wrote a lot of papers.
Oh, wonderful! That's great, Jeremy.
The mother one of the parties had been in contact with me, so often the way it works.
Great. And so a lot of our listeners wouldn't really know what a typical child abduction case would look like. What does it look like when one of the parents come to you distressed? Can you talk us through the process?
Well, there's two sides of the distress. Am I representing the taker or the left behind one? So I may be called by a mom who has taken the child from Singapore to America. And she did so in, let's say, in a typical kind of case, because maybe she'd gone to Singapore because the husband had a posting there. So maybe let's pretend they were living in New York, and dad is, husband is posted with the bank to be seconded there for 6 months or a year or something like that. So they go to Singapore with the child or the children, and he loves it and she doesn't. And after a bit, she's homesick and she wants to go back. And he's saying, no, he's having a great time. He's out every night and he's having fun and he's a big shot in Singapore now. And she's at home with the kids. And her career, maybe back in New York, has been interrupted because she's trailed after him.
Yes.
We call her the trailing spouse.
Yes.
So when he says, no, we're staying here, she gets the passports. Maybe she asks him to go back home. By home, she means New York. He says, no, we're here. And she gets on the plane and leaves with the kids. And he then files an action. He actually files an application with what's called the Singapore Central Authority. They send the application to the US State Department. And then husband follows up by starting a lawsuit in either state court or federal court in New York, filing a petition for the immediate return of the children to their habitual residence in Singapore. And mum comes to me and we defend the case. And we look at whether we can allege and win on the issue of habitual residence. Did the habitual residence shift from the US to Singapore? And we also look and see whether there are any defenses. So did he consent? Did he acquiesce? Are the children of sufficient age and maturity that they are objecting to going back to Singapore for some strong reason? Or the defense that we look at often as a kind of last resort is what we call the grave risk defense. It's actually an exception. And the grave risk exception is if the kids will be at risk of harm, physical or even psychological harm, if they are sent back to Singapore, then the American court need not return the children. So we look and see whether there has been domestic violence, whether there has been abuse, whether there has been psychological issues, perhaps also whether there are medical issues. In one case, a child in one country was receiving great treatment for autism and was improving. And if the court has sent the child back to the other location, it was proven that there were no facilities that would be able to treat the child's medical condition. So that created a risk of harm.
Yes.
And so in America, we have a trial on these issues. It is a very quick trial usually. And the reason it's quick is that the treaty says that these cases should be resolved within 6 weeks.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And cases don't get resolved in America in 6 weeks. Hotly contested cases don't. They drag on too long. Target is only a target, but the courts know that they are supposed to put these cases at the head of the calendar. So if we take the case on, we're probably working around the clock for 6 weeks. The preparation that you have to do is intense. We focus on live testimony of witnesses, cross-examination of witnesses, presentation of often gigantic amounts of documents
to prove
the various elements. And it is like a gigantic ordeal, much more so than in many other countries. So in other countries, they rely on the papers, the submissions of affidavits, more than live testimony. But that's the way it works in the US.
So in the US, you don't have affidavits where you put in all your supporting documents, all oral.
You can do it. It's unusual in a Hague case. So the only time you can win a case on the papers is if you have what you think is a slam dunk, total winning case, and you make your affidavits are in support of what we call a motion for summary judgment. To get them to win a motion for summary judgment, you got to prove that there are no triable issues of fact.
Okay. Yeah.
If there's a factual dispute, our courts invariably conduct a hearing, which means a trial, which means an old-fashioned kind of where you got to prepare your cross-examination intensely, and you got to have, documents or previous evidence to throw at the other side to show that their claim of grave risk or lack of grave risk is unjustified. We also have discovery, so sometimes we'll have a deposition, means testimony under oath with a court reporter in a lawyer's office before the hearing, and extensive production of documents and many other things that go on. There's a lot that goes on in these cases in a very short period of time.
No wonder it's an ordeal, because in Singapore, I would imagine it would just be on affidavit, and affidavits would be a few hundred pages, but we wouldn't have to do, what you're doing, round the clock. Wow.
Then we do the stay, then we do the appeal, then we do the request after the appeal is finished. Then the one side goes and asks for a do-over, meaning what they call an on-bank appeal request. It goes on. So, and it's done fast.
And how do you manage? I mean, you're managing your lawyers, you're managing your documents. How do you manage your clients' emotions through all of this?
Emotions?
Yeah.
Well, so the clients are at an emotional peak. What you have to do is be honest, as well as understanding. And you do not make false claims. You don't make false predictions. So I happen to be very conservative in the way that I work. I don't want clients to get inflated expectations. Yeah. I will always tell clients of the difficulties of their case and of the downsides. I will encourage them to talk settlement if at all possible. I think that clients appreciate truth, and they appreciate your understanding of their positions. So part of my job is to put myself in their shoes and try and understand what is so upsetting to them. And that's valuable for case preparation. It's also valuable to try to encourage potential settlement. Yes. So a lot of it is spending time with the client and having them understand that you get it. And then having them understand what they're likely to get out of a court case and what they cannot get out of a court case. So I'll tell you, I often find myself saying, look, if I was the judge in this case, here's how I would rule. You've not got, and I will tell them, your claims are overblown. Your claims are outlandish. You've not got a chance of winning. Or I'll tell them, let's go for it. But I tell them bluntly so they get it. Yeah. And prepare them for trial so they'll get it. So if a client is not answering the question in the preparation, I may tell them, look, if I was the judge, I would throw you out of the courtroom at this stage. You're not answering the question. So smile and say to them, yes. I hope you don't mind me saying that, but I gotta get the message through. I am fighting for you. Yes. Listen to what we're saying.
I think that's so critical, Jeremy, in family lawyering, to manage your clients' expectations.
Yes.
and empower them. And you know, sometimes when we're being a little bit firm with them, they think, oh, why is my lawyer so harsh on me? But I think when we reassure them, look, I'm on your side. I'm here to help you.
Exactly.
If you don't give me all the information, or if you're kind of not helpful, you're kind of hindering your own case, you won't be able to get the best outcome possible. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've got to get that you're on their side, and the fact
Yes.
that they know that you know your stuff and that you have the know-how and the experience makes a gigantic difference. And you're doing it with the very best of motivations.
Yes.
So I think, you know, in terms of handling the clients, I'll tell you what I often find is in the international context, you know, she's from one culture and country and language, and he's from another country and culture and language. And these guys are just not communicating. You know, you sometimes wonder how the heck they even got married.
Together,
And then, you know, in a very typical case, she has followed him, and we're still in a sexist world. So forgive me if I'm talking in a sexist way, but she's followed him to, you know, in my world, to New York from, you know, somewhere else. And she is homesick, and, you know, and at first when he said we're going to move to New York, it sounded so exciting and glamorous, and, you know, lovely restaurants and nightclubs and skyscrapers. And then she comes here, and he's not living in that area. He's living in somewhere in a small house in the suburbs. And she doesn't adjust, and his family doesn't understand her. And then she has a child, and man, you know, she wants a mum. And her mum comes for the first few weeks and then goes back home, and then leaves the client in tears with a new baby and a husband who's cold and doesn't understand why she's upset. And after a while, I will often have a talk to the man in that kind of position and say, I got to tell you what I see based on a lot of experiences really going on here. And you know, I'd like you to be open to putting yourself in your wife's shoes for a little while. And I find that often they become receptive to that. They start to understand a little bit more about the wife's situation and why she is freaking out, why she ran away with the kids.
Yeah.
And those kind of discussions, you know, I find are often incredibly helpful. I hope that they occur before an abduction occurs. I hope that they occur when a child, you know, and I do it from the perspective of the child. The child deserves to have a mom and a dad.
Yeah.
And the way the track you're both on that's not going to work. It's just, and that's not fair. And, you know, I may even consider that child abuse.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the message has to get through. The message often does get through. I'm not saying I save every marriage, but, you know, I think I've saved some.
Wonderful, Jeremy. That's very that's amazing that you get them to think about what the other person's going through, because I think that's empathy. You know, having empathy in family law is so critical, where you don't just see your client's perspective, but you see the big picture. I think
it's important in every family law case, and it's especially challenging when the parents are from different places and they just don't understand each other, and they don't understand why I'm giving her everything, and she seems to feel that she's got nothing, and she feels exactly the reverse.
Yes. So Jeremy, you've been all around the world. You've done all kinds of different child abduction, international divorce cases. What would you say has been one of your more interesting cases?
Oh gosh,
so many.
There's too many to count. You know, the ones that were the most recent are the ones that were the most interesting. So we did one very recently with an abduction of a child from Thailand to New York. I can't really go into too many of the details. It is a reported case, and we did win the case, and it was against. It involved some very, very, very high-profile family in Thailand, and another clash of cultures, and issues of control, issues of parental involvement. With some cultures, the extent of parental involvement is something that Westerners are not accustomed to, and that may change everything. I just can't tell you, how many different cases there have been. There was one case where we won a case in New York where the children were taken from Montreal, Canada to New York. They lived for a year and a half in New York while the dad was in Montreal. The mother took them to New York, and mother had told father, come to New York. As soon as you come here, we'll have an apartment and we'll repair our marriage and everything will be great. And finally he organized his affairs and drove down to, and instead of meeting his beloved wife and children, he was greeted by a process server who served him with divorce papers.
Oh no.
So we started a Hague Convention case, not a custody case, a Hague case. It was another habitual residence case, and I won't go into that, and it was appealed, and we won the case. And my client was elated, and the mother was in tears, and the children went back to Montreal, Canada, at which point they went straight to a court in Montreal, and the French-speaking, the judge in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, said, these children, they've been in New York for a year and a half, and the Americans send them back. They don't understand anything. They certainly don't understand habitual residence. We understand it. And he said, I now, as part of my custody case, these children are going back to New York. So it was one of those cases where we won the battle and lost the war. We won this incredibly hotly contested Hague Convention case, but then the custody court in Montreal said otherwise. So there are always wrinkles, there are always unusual things that happen.
Just part of what you do, wrinkles and and just.
I've done I've done tons of cases involving Japan. So
Japan,
that is a different planet. Japan is a different planet. And Japan only joined the Hague Convention relatively recently, and joined it because some of us put enormous pressure. I had a client whose children were abducted there, and he went there and grabbed the children on the street in Japan to bring them back to Tennessee, and drove at top speed to the American consulate in southern Japan to get the passports that had been promised. And as he was about to enter the consulate, he was arrested by the Japanese police and put in jail for 18 days with the lights on full blast, never turned off. And he got out of jail by saying he would go back straight to America and would never come back to Japan. And he's not seen his children since. That was quite a few years ago. I was interviewed on all the TV shows, Today Show, and et cetera, and there was a big outpouring of outrage about this terrible incident, which you couldn't understand unless you understood Japanese culture and Japanese law. But Hillary Clinton, as Secretary of State, got intrigued and interested in this concept, and a lot of pressure was put on Japan to sign the Hague Convention. And Japan signed the Hague Convention. And then it's been fascinating to work on cases thereafter to see that legal system and that society adjusting to a treaty that some people in Japan think was imposed upon them, that requires a way of looking at family law that is entirely different from the way that Japanese have looked at family law until then, and even until now. So Japan is just so different, and so interesting and intriguing and wonderful, but and so awful for so many left behind parents in the West who've lost their children to Japanese spouses who have taken the children there, and the children are hardly seen again, often never seen again.
But that's really good that they signed that convention then.
They signed it, they did, and they're trying, the central authority in Japan is part of the foreign ministry. And I was there, I think it was a year ago, as their guest to lecture to the foreign ministry and to assorted lawyers groups on the convention. And I work with them a lot, and they're trying, the central authority is trying to encourage compliance. But Japanese family law is different. They have a one-parent rule. The Civil Code of Japan says that one parent will have custody. It is impossible to have sharing of custody.
Wow. Okay.
And traditionally, there's no enforcement of family court orders.
Really?
Yeah. Can you believe it?
I can't believe it.
Yeah.
How do they
order? Nobody enforces a damn thing.
Oh my goodness. So what's the point of the court order if no one can enforce it?
So that's why they don't have any court orders in family law. The judges kind of have traditionally mediated and talked, and my position is they just try and bloody well wear you down, and they do nothing. Why would they do something if their orders are not going to be enforced?
Yeah.
So when they signed the Hague Convention, for the first time, they put in some provisions about enforcement, at least in a Hague case. And then we went through a bunch of cases where there was no enforcement, even in a Hague case. So the Hague court would issue an order,
yeah,
and it wouldn't get enforced. And just now they're starting to figure out they've passed some new legislation, and there is some enforcement starting. But that whole thing is intriguing. And since I have a wife who is Japanese, and my youngest child is Japanese and American and British, so it's something that I'm kind of interested in for personal reasons as well. But, and I love Japan. It's just totally different.
And that, I think,
Weird.
What makes you so special, Jeremy, you have a very third culture family dynamic, and that means that you're not just looking at what's happening in the US, you're looking at what the rest of the world's doing, which I think is I'm like that. I spend half my life in Australia, half my life in Singapore, so I'm always kind of like, so I'm always, that's why I wanted to interview you on the show, because you have an international perspective, and I think you have an advantage when you see the world through in international lens, and you kind of can glean from different concepts and you learn so much when you're exposed to what other countries are doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we become kind of like international cultural anthropologists or something. We have to learn about our clients from different places, what makes them tick.
Yes. And so now with technology, I would imagine that some of your cases might be handled a little bit differently. Can you talk on that? Has technology impacted the cases?
Well, insofar as we can Zoom the world, and so we can have the kind of conversation that we're having right now easily enough, so we can prepare clients for testimony, and we can have them testify remotely. So, in a lot of the Hague cases, we have remote testimony by Skype or Zoom or an equivalent service, and remote mediation actually works, because it's hard to mediate a Hague case because it's either one country or another country, but sometimes mediation can work. So, and now we're with the COVID problem. Courts in the US and England are doing Zoom trials, and so that makes a gigantic difference. Yes. And I think, if as and when COVID is no longer around or no longer the issue, I think that all of us, including judges, being accustomed to the use of this kind of technology, will want to keep a lot of it in place. Yes,
we're having the same conversations in Singapore as well, because we've never had Zoom hearings, but now we have Zoom hearings. You have judges calling you on your mobile phone. It's a fundamentally new world that we're in. And because we're kind of have a taste of that. We want more of it. We don't want maybe the traditional models of lugging your luggage to court for maybe
Right.
basic case conferences. If you don't need to, you can dispose of it quicker on Zoom.
Just have to remember when you're on a Zoom trial not to wear your pajamas.
Or at least just the top half and then pajama bottoms.
Yeah,
Unless
exactly.
my friend in Australia was doing I think a high court hearing, and the judge was, said all right, and I think everyone rose up, and then halfway through the all rise, his dog started barking. So it's just I think everyone knows
Different.
that we're doing the hearing from our homes and from our bedroom sometimes, but it's a new world that we're in.
Yes.
And I think there's a certain level of empathy that comes with this. So, yeah. So just to wrap up, Jeremy, I'm going to, you are an academic, you're a lawyer, but you're also an educator. So do you have any final words of wisdoms for students or young lawyers?
Yes, I do. My recommendation would be anybody can be an expert. And so find an area that you're interested in, preferably a niche area, a very narrow area, something that turns you on, that is specific and limited, that you can master. And anybody can master a particular topic. Just research that one particular area, get to know it inside and out. And suddenly you're the expert on this particular area of a branch of the law. And, pretty soon you'll know more about it than maybe anybody. And then write about it, or talk about it, or podcast it, or Zoom it, and, and go on social media about it. And pretty soon people will bump into you, and you'll start to have a client or two about that, consulting you about that particular area. And then you can broaden it, and the clients will come into your very narrow niche area, and then some clients will come in something kind of related. So I'm a firm believer in mastery, and I think that clients will find the person who is who knows that particular area, and rather than be, jack of all trades. Yeah, so that's what I believe. Second is something I've already said: put yourself in your client's shoes, put yourself in their shoes, and then, in family law especially, do your best to have your client put him or herself in the other party's shoes. And that's the way to benefit both sides of the family and benefit the most important ones, which are the kids. Because it's not fair to have kids with parents who are at each other's throats.
Yes.
And so often these things can be ameliorated if both sides will start to look at the position of the other party. Those are my thoughts.
Great advice, Jeremy. Thank you for that. And just to wrap up, how can people reach out to you if they need legal advice?
www.international-divorce.com or jmorley@international-divorce.com. So my website is very thorough. I have links to the laws of, I don't know how many, 40, 50 different countries. I have a blog there. My website is very thorough. And I try to include as many articles as possible on there, so it's packed with information about the laws and procedures of countries around the world.
Yes,
so
it's great. Yeah. I'll put it in the show links.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us in today's episode.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thanks. Have a good day. Bye.
You too.